Look what we found, another visitor. This is really gross, but I'm not really surprised it was in here either. Oh, and check it out. We've got another one, and where there's two, folks, there's more. So I'm, kind of not looking forward to finding what else is in here. This here is a viewer's very dirty game console. And in this video, we're gonna deep clean it. Welcome to GCDC. Stay with me. Fellas, let's have a serious chat for a second and talk about something 2 out of every 3 men experience by the age of 35. Some form of hair loss. And some just assume it's a fact of life, whether you blame genetics or stress or what have you, but there are things you can be doing now to prevent it. With Keeps, a licensed doctor will review your information online and recommend the right hair loss treatment plan. And from there, your medications are shipped right to your door every 3 months, and you'll have 24/7 access to your Keeps doctor with any concerns or questions you may have. Keeps is the more affordable option for hair loss and pattern baldness because they offer generic versions of FDA-approved medications. And while it can take upwards of 4 to 6 months to begin seeing results, those that have are so glad they started when they did, because the best way to prevent hair loss is to do something about it while you still have hair left. So don't wait any longer. If you're ready to jump on board, visit keeps.com/Greg Salazar or click the top link in this video's description and save 50% on your first order. So for those who are new to this playlist, the goal here is simple. We reach out to folks in and around the Orlando, Florida area and offer to deep clean their gaming consoles for free. We also have the PCDC series where we deep clean personal computers, and we also have the Fix or Flop series where we attempt to fix those computers. So there's quite a bit going on right now in the area, and I'm grateful to folks like this gentleman here who gave us their Xbox 360 Elite to clean in a few days. This one doesn't look too dirty, I'll admit, from the shell, just on the outside, but there is dust caked up in a lot of places, and he showed me some interesting behind the scenes photos of what it looks like underneath this shell. Not pretty. Yeah, you can see there is dust caked up in a lot of places, and that means that the internals around the main board especially, maybe even the fan and the heat sink, those are all going to be caked in dust, and that's exactly what this video will seek to remedy. We're going to clean up all this mess and try to get this thing looking as close to brand new as possible, given the small imperfections that we have, cuts and things in the plastic that we can't get rid of. Obviously, we can get rid of the dust, and hopefully get this thing running much cooler and quieter again. Now this one here, as I said, is an Xbox 360 Elite, and chances are if you were born in the early to mid 90s, you had one of these in your home. This thing came out back in 2007, which makes this almost a 15-year-old console. I can't really believe that. It's pretty nuts that this thing is already this old, because I remember playing like Forza 4 on my Xbox 360. I had a white one, not a black one like this, and that's really one of the only differences between the Elite and the standard Xbox 360. This had a matte black finish, and it shipped with a 120 gig hard drive standard. Now, one more caveat about this specific console here I forgot to mention earlier is the fact that we aren't even sure it functions. The owner told me that it's been sitting in his house for several years. That makes it the perfect GCDC candidate, but we might need to be doing a bit of fixing to get this functioning if it doesn't already out of the gate. We're gonna test it before we start taking things apart, and then once we deep clean it all and I kind of give the main board a once over and check connections and things, we'll try to boot it up again after all is said and done. We want to make sure that it still functions if it functioned to begin with and we've already, disassembled it and things. But if it doesn't work before, maybe deep cleaning this thing could fix whatever was causing it not to function ahead of time. So let's test it out. Now I almost forgot that these Xboxes don't have integrated power supplies, so I would have been screwed because I don't have this proprietary connector here. So I'm grateful that the viewer remembered that because I totally forgot to even ask him for it. So let's plug this in and we're gonna give it a shot. Ooh. Mechanical hard disk drive sounds. But she works. That's awesome. He really wasn't that confident that it was gonna work, so the fact that it does is pretty sweet. Now, I'm not sure about long-term testing. I don't know if it will overheat or whatever, if we happen to kind of let this drag out and stay on for a good while. But I'm just worried about it posting to begin with, and that is a great start. So we know that we should look for this again once we deconstruct it, deep clean it, and put it all back together. So to get started with disassembly, for these old Xboxes, the first thing we need to do is remove the hard disk, which is mounted on top of the console, and yeah. That was easy. Next up, we need to remove the top and bottom meshes, and for this, we're gonna need to pull on some tabs. We might actually be able to just start from one end because this looks like it has been opened before. You can see what these tabs kind of look like. It's what you want to push on from the inside of each of these grills. One of these tabs is already missing, so it must have broken off when it was previously disassembled, which is a shame, but I think it'll still work. It should still be held in place, no problem. One on this side is just a little bit tougher because it's a tad bit recessed into the frame, but this one should. There we go. And all 6 clips, it looks like, on this one are good to go. So we only have 1 broken clip on the other side. Now, check out how gross it is inside these grills. A lot of dust caked up in here. And if it's caked up here, chances are it's probably caked up in the console as well, in and around the main board. You can see the other side is, well, arguably worse. Very dusty here as well. Next, we can remove the front cover. This should be, okay, that was easier than I thought. Now, interestingly enough, it looks like this console has also been opened fully because the little sticker there that I think is for warranty has already been cut. And there's no other reason to cut that other than to take it fully apart to service something inside. So curious to see what we'll find in here. Now, there are a few clips that hold both halves of this shell together. Undo these and things should, for the most part, slide out. There might be a couple more at the back that I'm not aware of. Aha, so this tool here, actually super useful for these because you can just shove one end of this into each clip. And now I think we can just pull up. There we go. Now it's time to remove some Torx screws. These shinier chrome looking ones are the ones that are holding the other half of the shell together. I believe these, let's see if I can eyeball it here. I'm thinking T8. Oh, we're a little loose. I think it's T9. Dang it. I was close. I was like guesstimating. Yes, T9 it is. Now let's see, I think there's a retention clip here preventing us from removing this. There we go. Okay, now that that's been removed, I think we can slide this on up. Nice, all right. So this console is, yeah, it's freaking gross. It's the perfect candidate for the GCDC playlist, so I'm glad we selected it. Again, based off the earlier pictures, it looked like a viable candidate, but I'm really glad we're taking the time to clean this one because it doesn't look like it's ever been cleaned in its life. And when you think about the fact that most of the dust that accumulates inside homes is human skin or dead human skin, that can be pretty off-putting for a lot of people. I've been doing this a lot though recently, and so it doesn't really bother me too much. I need to disassemble a few more things before we can actually start cleaning things out. So we need to take the optical drive out, we need to take the heatsink apart, we need to take the 2 fans out, and we'll try to get the main board out of this frame as well. Just look at how much dust is caked up on top of this heatsink. This is right on top of the APU, mind you, which is in charge of all processing. So you don't want to have this stuff caked up here. It's very inefficient. A lot of the heat that gets trapped by this heatsink needs to be dumped by the fans, but if you have this dust here, it acts sort of like an insulator and keeps the heat trapped here, which can affect performance long term. A lot of folks tend to think that because these are consoles, they either work or they don't. They think that it's very binary, which is not the case. You'll see frame drops, you'll see that random stutter, frame dips that are actually pretty constant throughout playback sometimes as well if the dust cakes up a lot. And that's exactly what is happening here. This is right on the verge of becoming a console that overheats. And what I mean by overheats is, well, it has to throttle itself back. The APU does in order to save itself from further harm because it's running too hot. It's running outside of the temperature threshold that the designers had in mind for this unit. Now this is a shot of the other side of that major heatsink, and you can see that dust is getting caked on the intake side of the heatsink because the fans that are further toward the top of this picture are actually exhausting air. So they're pulling air in through the heatsink and exhausting it out the rear of the console. The air comes in from the sides, which are perforated, right? So all this dust being caked up here is actually impeding airflow as well, which is double trouble. So let's press on with this disassembly then, starting first with the optical drive, which I think just slides on out. I don't think there's anything actually holding it in apart from the screws that were holding the shell together. Let's see. I think it just comes right up. Yep, there's a bit of adhesive on the bottom side of this. And we also need to mine the connections, obviously. I think there's just one. Oh, there's 2. Okay, so one of these here for power. Carefully undo that. And then this other one here looks like a SATA data cable, just like you'd find in your PC. It's basically what this is. So here we go. And we can remove the optical drive. We can now remove the optical connections from the mainboard side as well. I want to be very careful here. There's one, and let's say the data connection is a bit tougher. There we go, there's 2. Now we can remove this front power plate. I think we have 2 T8 Torx screws, slightly smaller than the chassis ones we undid earlier. We can remove this little cover here for the LEDs. There we go, and then you can see one more torque screw here at the bottom. And now the board should slide right out since it slots into the main board through this port right here. Also, ew, that looks like, I don't know what that looks like, that's a bug. Look what we found, another visitor. This is really gross, but I'm not really surprised it was in here either. Oh, and check it out. We've got another one, and where there's two, folks, there's more. So I'm, yeah, kind of not looking forward to finding what else is in here. Ooh, yep, okay, here's another one inside of the power board. So they were definitely shacking it in here. Next up, I think we can remove this white shroud here that kind of directs air out the rear of the console. Doesn't look like it's held by anything anymore, although I might be wrong. Let's see, we're good on that side. Where's my pry tool? There we go, just one clip, and that should be it. All right, woo-wee, it is nasty in here. Also, ew, what the heck is that? It looks like a larger roach slash some other bug I'm not aware of. That's really freaking gross. Woo. All right, that is more like it. Wow, that's really freaking gross. Oh boy. Let's just set this here for now. The best way to remove these, in my experience, is with a flathead screwdriver. You come in from one side and just rotate. You want to be careful not to nick any of the SMDs on the back side of this board. You can see, comes up fairly easily. This heat sink should, yep, just attach like so. Okay, so here is our motherboard with a bare, actually I forgot this was a split design here. Oh, interesting. Ooh, and we've got another critter trapped here at the base of this fan assembly. Speaking of which, we need to get this out of here. It's held in very simply by a couple of clips here. And I think if we pull back, we can get the CPU out. It's a bit stubborn. There we go. And then this should, kind of angle its way out. And then we can pull it up. Can we? There we go, almost. It's being held in by one more post, I think. Nice. So yeah, I don't care who you are, this is freaking disgusting. I know there's worse out there, sure, and there's plenty of stuff that's not as gross as this, but every now and then I see somebody in the comments say, oh, you think this is bad, I've seen so much worse. Well, okay, cool, you might have seen worse, but you know what? At the end of the day, this is still really disgusting. I think that we can look at this objectively and say, yeah, this is not something I'd want in my home. Same goes for the inside of this frame where the fans used to sit. That's freaking caked, my dudes. So that's about it, folks. Thanks for watching, and thanks for cleaning with me. I'm joking. It's a joke. It's okay. Relax. We are not even halfway through the video yet, I assume, because we've still got the bulk of the work to do. Yes, we took everything apart, but we've still got to deep clean everything, and then we've got to put it all back together. Now, a few disclosures. You guys, some of you asked about the optical drives, and I did want to talk about this a tad in episode 2 before we get too deep into this. So if anyone else asks in the future, just refer them to this timestamp in this video. I don't want to take these apart. It's not that I'm afraid of hurting myself in here. There's just a lot of very sensitive stuff in here. It's a bit like taking apart a hard disk drive, right? I mean, we'll clean the external parts of the hard disk drive, but I'm not gonna take those apart and clean inside where the platters are and the lasers and things. It's just, it gets very finicky in there, and I don't wanna risk damaging this because I don't wanna have to replace it. And to that end, there's really no active airflow moving through this apart from the disc that you insert and remove over and over again. There should be no reason why inside of here is as dirty as this. It's probably a bit dirty, but as long as it's still reading discs and not making strange sounds, it's probably fine. So that's why I don't take those apart, but I will obviously clean everything else as much as I can. Now, a lot of these plastic bits and things, we're actually just gonna blast those with water. Even this frame here, I don't really like using water on bare metal, but as long as you dry it off fairly quick, it shouldn't tarnish or leave any weird residue. Now, the main board, obviously, the fans, the heat sinks, those are the things that we're gonna clean here in the studio, and I'm gonna show you all of it, including the outside work right now. Oh yeah, this one is looking so much better. And now for the plastic shell. And the last few pieces. Now I'm gonna dry everything off by hand, and I can already tell you, especially these plastics, are looking so much nicer just from being hit with water. And this is why I try to use it as much as possible. You could actually add soap to this if you wanted and get even more thorough with the cleaning, but I don't think here we're gonna need to. The outside of this console was already kind of sort of clean. Now the only piece that actually didn't fare too well, and this wasn't really my doing, it was already kind of like this when we opened it up, is this piece here. It has quite a bit of staining on it that was not removed with water. So this one we might need to use some IPA on just to see if it comes up, and if it doesn't, well, nothing more we can really do apart from replace this piece, and it's not really all that vital. I think it's just an interference shield, doesn't really serve any other function, so I think we'll just leave it as is. There's no sense dropping more coin into a console that's this old. Next up, fans and heatsink. It's gonna focus, there we go. I'm taking the stuff outside this time because I've learned my lesson. And we'll clean the rest of this inside with some IPA and Q-tips. Next up, this super gross heatsink. Should be fairly easy. Whoops. There we go. You can see this is where the anti-static nylon bristles in this electric duster come in super handy. Pardon the wind, I'm outside. You can dig really deep into these heat sinks here and really scrub away. If there's anything remaining inside that you can't reach, then you can just blast it with water. It should be fine for these. Now we can tackle the thermal paste at the bottoms of both of these heat sinks. And yes, it's pretty tough. It's not wanting to come up. Definitely old stuff. Gotta kind of scrape it away with my pry tool. Jeez, this stuff it's rough. You know your thermal paste is bad when you have to literally chip at it to get it to come up. Ugh. Right, so now we've the fan assembly to clean. So we've got IPA and I've got Q-tips here. And all we're gonna do, we're gonna start with the perimeters of each of these fan housings. And we're gonna work our way in to the centers of these blades. A lot of dust that gets kicked up around these frames. And yeah, just look at how dark that Q-tip already is. And that's just from scrubbing around one single time. So we'll have to do this multiple times to get this thing looking brand new. By the way, each of these fans typically in a PCDC or GCDC video takes about 15 to 20 minutes to clean. Potentially longer depending on how complex the fan blade assemblies are. But in this case, the blades themselves are quite small and there aren't too many blades. So we can actually do this rather quick by comparison. So it's not too bad. The longest I've spent on a fan about 45 minutes. And after those 45 minutes were up, I said, you know what, it's good enough. Sometimes the perfectionist in me likes to take advantage of the situation, and I find myself just spending way too much time on a single small component when I could probably be cleaning it a bit smarter using something else. So the Q-tips are nice, again, because I can be precise, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to spend 1 hour cleaning a single fan, especially when there are multiple of those fans in the same system. I want to make sure you get all the tight spaces because that's where dust really likes to hang out. And we're almost finished with this. We've been scrubbing for about 10 minutes or so off camera. I think maybe go once more over the blades. They like to hide dust after I go over them once or twice with Q-tips. Every now and then you'll see more dust pop up once the IPA dries. A bit frustrating. But this is looking a lot cleaner now. I think I'm going to hit it with the electric duster one more time. All right, these fans look so much better now. Now for this optical drive, again, it's going to be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to put a little bit of IPA here on the top. We'll let this soak into our shop towel. And then we can clean. We'll just wipe away a lot of the surface dust. You could also use a vacuum or an electric duster like the one we have, but I prefer to get as little of this dust in the air as possible. And I do that by using IPA. It kind of soaks up the dust instead of spraying it everywhere or sucking it up into a vacuum. Let's see, get around the sides here. Want to be careful with this. Don't want to manhandle it too much and knock something out. Clean the underside of it. Yep, soap and water. Definitely should have started with soap and water. Looks really good now though. Gonna give the hard drive enclosure a thorough scrub inside and out. Gonna give these cables a quick scrub. And lastly, we have the main board. This thing is extremely dirty. Obviously, we still need to clean the thermal compound around both the CPU and GPU as well, but we're just gonna hit this with the electric duster first because there is so much dust basically everywhere. This is gonna be super gross. Here we go. Ooh, yeah, that was super gross, and I've got my air filter purifier thing on now, so if you hear that weird humming in the background, that's what it is. There's now a ton of dust floating in this room. Why don't you use a vacuum cleaner, Greg? Well, I could use a vacuum, yes, and I do frequently in between shots like these, but I really like the portability of something like this, and it's much easier to film with because there's nothing attached to it. It's all cordless, and I can just suck up the dust later. Now for the thermal compound atop the processors. This is not gonna come up easily. Yeah, this is really bad. I expect some pretty sweet temperature drops as a result of repasting this because this stuff is just, we're literally chipping it away. Such a long and drawn out process this is when it's so sticky and difficult to work with. I'm just scraping it up, to be honest with you, which I don't advise if you're not comfortable working around smaller SMDs. If you don't have steady hands, it's probably not something worth your time. Just want to clear off as much of the crusty compound as you can off of the dies. It's these shiny mirror-like finishes here on these chips. And once you've got these cleaned off, you don't really have to worry about the stuff surrounding it. As long as it's not conductive, you can just apply new thermal compound and be good to go. The CPU, on the other hand, cleaned up a bit nicer, considering there's only one die. Next thing's just a bit easier to maneuver around. And there are larger SMDs on here, so I'm not as worried about chipping those and knocking them away. Looks pretty clean. Nice. We can take the time while we're here to clean these ports, this HDMI port, and we've got a few others around it. Got the RJ45 port over here and USB. On top of it, we'll also clean the housings. And we're gonna give the main board a good once over with IPA and Q-tips. I'm not going at it too hard. Obviously, I don't want to pry up any of these SMDs, and it is possible to do with Q-tips, but I am being aggressive enough to the point where the dust that is still lingering behind, even after hitting it with that electric duster, is being picked up. There's a lot of it still trapped on these larger capacitors and diodes and things, so you want to be real careful when you're going in between them. You can see they're kind of loose. You don't want to hit them too hard. You could dislodge them. You don't want to have to resolder anything. If you can help it, ask me how I know. Just a couple more spots to go, and then we'll try to get the rest of this IPA to evaporate with the electric duster, and then we can start reassembling. Yeah, this looks so much better. Check that out. And fast forward a bit to a deep cleaned office. Everything is ready for a reassembly. We're gonna start first, of course, with the main board. We're gonna get some new thermal compound on here, courtesy of Thermal Grizzly. I use their stuff all the time. They're not a sponsor of this video, but I do wanna give them a shout out because they make really good stuff. And this Cryonaut here is some of the best thermal paste I've ever used. So we're gonna use this and apply it to both the CPU and GPU, and then we're gonna get these heat sinks fitted, we'll get the fans installed in the chassis, and then we'll mate the main board to the chassis. So thermal compound going on. A little bit there, want some here, and then a bit more over here on the CPU side. Wanna make sure all this is covered once we get the heatsink on here, or both of them. Actually, there's two heat sinks. There we go, looking mighty fine. And I actually realized I put the thermal pads in the wrong places. So we actually need to cool these 4 chips here. And with the thermal pads, these will make contact with the chassis. And the chassis acts essentially as one large heat sink, so that's kind of the purpose here. Now for those wondering, the way I clean these thermal pads, because I don't have replacements for these are thicker, kind of jellier, spongier ones, I just very lightly scrub them with IPA and Q-tips. You want to be very careful because you can end up destroying the thermal pad in question if you're too aggressive with it. And you can see the job isn't perfect, but they still look much cleaner than they did when we first took this apart. So this should just slot in like so. And then we kind of got to pry it into place. Nice, that was pretty easy. Now we're ready for the merge. We'll mine this fan cable here, move it out of the way, and things should just slide in like so. Be careful not to scratch anything. Eesh. Yeah, definitely a tight fit. We'll go ahead and connect this fan cable while we're here. It is a tight squeeze. There we go. We can get this cover on here. That will channel air. Actually, I'm gonna flip it around. This just kind of sits here. It clips in one place, and I think that's it. I think it's held in by the shell screws a bit later in this reinstall process. I think that's, yeah, that's it right there. You can also take this time to fasten the heatsink screws. And now that we're finished with this, we can move on to peripherals. The optical drive is up next, and this should just slot in perfectly. There we go. And this will be tightened down again with the shell screws later. And we've got power and data cables wired in. Nice. Next we'll take care of the power board. It connects right here. So we'll go ahead and slide it in. And then the first of the 3 screws, oh, if I can get this in, there it goes. First of the 3 screws right here. And this will actually be covered up by the plastic diffuser for the LEDs that surround the power button. So if you see the red ring of death or even just the green lights, that's where this comes from. So this will just clip on, I think this side is up like so. And then we can lock the rest of the board in with the 2 remaining Torx screws on the corners. Now we can get the top cover installed. Should just slide on like so. I'm a tad bit forgetful about what I'm supposed to do here. I think, ooh, is it going like that? I think that's it. I really hope this turns on. Wouldn't that suck if it didn't? Disc remover button needs to be installed. So get this blue section in first, and then, yep, do a few test clicks. Working just fine. And now we can get the remaining sides installed. So we'll get the large, this is actually the bottom side if you lay your console down flat. So this will clip in. Gotta be careful where this is lining up. That looks good. And then we'll get, oh gosh, which side is which? So the hard drive is on top. All right, that's it. Yeah, I think everything else is good to go. We'll get this hard disk drive installed. Fairly straightforward. Or no, is it the other way? It's the other way around. Nice. This hard drive actually looks like it's from an original Xbox 360, now that I think of it. It doesn't match the rest of the console. Anyway, there she is. Now it's time for the moment of truth. Let's see if this thing powers on. Sounds good. It's a good sign. Yep, we get the LED lights up front, and we get the post. That's good news. Everything works, we assembled it correctly, and I imagine it's gonna run a lot quieter now that we've deep cleaned it and replaced the thermal paste, which that really needed to be done. Heck, if we did nothing else, replacing the thermal paste alone probably saved us 5 to 10 degrees Celsius in load temps. Not even kidding. Well, we did it. Another episode of GCDC in the books. This one turned out very nice. Unfortunately, there's not much you can see on the outside. Again, it's an older console, so the scratches and the deep blemishes and the discolorations, I really can't get rid of those, especially on a black chassis like this. White, there are some things you can do, especially if it's like turned a yellow color. White tends to do that with time. So there are ways to correct that, but with black, I mean, there's some weird etchings and things, especially on the back of this one, that I just can't get rid of. That said, everything else dust-wise in here has been evacuated. It should be much cleaner inside. You guys saw the earlier shots when we were reassembling. It's just a night and day difference, and it's no longer gonna be a home for cockroaches, which that's always nice, right? With that, if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know by smashing that like button and subscribing if you have not already. If you want to find any of the gear we use to deconstruct this console and deep clean it, it's all in the video description, tied to Amazon and maybe Newegg affiliate links, it depends, but that support goes a long way for us. We get pennies on the dollar when you buy things through those links, but it does add up over time and helps us continue doing what we do. Now, if you have a super nasty console and you live in and around the Orlando, Florida area, be sure to click the link in this video's description. It'll take you to a form you can fill out to sign up to have your system cleaned. And we do it for free at no charge at all. And if you like the way that this looks and you, again, qualify, we can take care of your console as well. It doesn't matter how old it is, as long as it's a console kind of like this. It could be, you know, as old as NES. It could be as new as a PS4, even PS4 Pro, PS5. I'd be willing to work on a PS5 if you trust me enough. And look, obviously, if I screw something up myself, I'm going to cover you. I'm either going to buy you a new console outright, or I'll buy the replacement components to make sure that you're taken care of. But I've been very careful. I learned from the first episode, and I've been really trying to take my time when it comes to disassembling these to make sure that everything is in working order once it's all reassembled again. With that, yeah, like, subscribe, the stuff I just said, support us in the descriptions, and leave a comment. Let me know what kind of console you want to see next here in the GCDC playlist. My name is Greg. Thanks for deep cleaning with me.